doing this for purpose of a coercive diplomacy, it's hard to understand. I mean, they detonate the nuclear bombs and launch missiles and so forth, and never draw the U.S. to the table of negotiations so far. But I don't think they do cyber attack, and they have to identify who they are, and this is what we can do. So unless you come to the table to talk to us and discuss our peace agreement or whatever, we're going to continue doing this. I don't think that is possible in my personal response.
All right. Well, on the U.S. defenses, you can break this into three parts. The Defense Department and the military has made a tremendous effort over the last decade to harden their networks, and it's a very uneven struggle. China and Russia have also made major efforts to penetrate those networks. If it's any consolation, we do the same thing to them. But they probably have been able, the Chinese in particular, have been able to compromise some major weapon systems. And sometimes when you see cost overruns in weapons programs, it's because people are having to redo the software, reharden the weapon system. But DoD has made a major effort, and they have something called the Defense Industrial Base Initiative, which works with the leading companies. Probably about 6 years ago, the Defense Department brought in all the major defense contractors, gave their CEOs a one-day top secret clearance, and briefed them fully on the threat they faced. And they were also shocked that helped build support for a more permanent effort. So defense is probably our most secure set of networks. Critical infrastructure is very uneven. Those companies that have an incentive to take action, banks, telcos, they have put a lot of petroleum companies, they have put a lot of effort into cybersecurity, right? Because they're under daily attack. It costs them hundreds of millions of dollars on average. So you can find good progress in the big companies in these sectors. The problem for the U.S. is the U.S. is a gigantic economy, right? And so pick a number, pick any sector you want. There's probably between 2,000 and 3,000 companies. There's 2,000 to 3,000 electrical companies. There's 2,000 to 3,000 water facilities. There's thousands of facilities. The high end, the companies that are large and wealthy, they provide the bulk of the services. They can afford good cybersecurity, but the smaller companies cannot. And the dilemma for us is the interconnection. If you remember the 2003 Northeast power blackout, that was a small electrical company in Ohio, right, that had trouble. But because our electrical grid is interconnected, because it's linked, you could attack a small vulnerable company and produce a regional effect. So that's where we have to be concerned, is critical infrastructure. Our defenses are uneven. Civilian agencies in the U.S. government have so far largely been really bad at cybersecurity. That might change. Justice makes an effort. The law enforcement agencies make an effort, but many of the other agencies are relatively clueless. And you saw 2 weeks ago a presidential announcement of a new initiative to try and get agencies to do better. Maybe the best sign of where we stand vis-a-vis North Korea is that so far the U.S. has found Russia, China, and Iran probing its critical infrastructure networks, looking for vulnerabilities that could be used for an attack in the event of conflict. So far we have not seen North Korea doing that. I think it's inevitable, if only because of the connections to some of these other countries. But so far, of our four opponents, our four potential opponents, only 3 have the capability to do the kind of probing we're talking about. But I confidently expect that to change within a few years.
Thank you. Anyone from the floor? Jeff, come up to the microphone, please.
Hello, sir. How you doing? My name is Specialist Jeff Hugh, and I represent the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. I'm currently on active duty status, here stationed here at Fort Belvoir. I'm also a former member of ICAS. This question is directed towards yourself, Dr. Lewis, and also towards Scott. towards our former other speaker too, sir. So towards Mr. Husey. So I'll start off with you, Dr. Lewis, sir. So over in May or June timeframe, as you know, that Chinese hackers, they got into the DoD system and all that, and that was a very big concern for us. Especially, they briefed us service members also to not go on certain sites and whatnot. So with that, sir, if you connected the dots, do you think that in any way, shape, or form that could lead back to North Korea being connected with these Chinese hackers and this occurrence that happened during May or June timeframe?
Oh, okay, the answer is probably not. It looks like the North Koreans have focused on the U.S. military in Korea. They've focused certainly on the South Korean military, but so far it doesn't look like they have done much against DoD itself. China, and it's also Russia, by the way, that penetrated these networks. The Chinese and the Russians have made a significant effort, less of an effort, and a more focused effort, regionally focused effort from Iran and North Korea.
Okay, and now for Mr. Husey. Sir, I did enjoy what you had to say, sir, and also you said that you feel as if China and North Korea are working together, and that was the statement you made, sir. My question is that right now, the subject of China is a very complex situation. There's a lot of arousal going on with them, especially what has been going on through the summer months up until now. So here we are in a situation in America where a lot of our businesses are offshoring their businesses to China, and China, from my understanding in the international relations world, they love us because they view us as a dollar sign. You know, we mean money to them. We give them money. We're a source of income for them. So if you think that China is working hand in hand with North Korea, do you think they're willing to sacrifice all the business that we're making them and basically all the income we're earning them, they're willing to sacrifice that just to work with North Korea when, you know, in the IR world, they've always viewed North Korea, well, China as their bigger brother. China was the bigger brother, and North Korea is just a nuisance. So how do you feel about that subject, sir?
It's a good question. I would answer with Mike Pillsbury's new book on, he found in China a document that detailed that the Chinese Communist Party had gone to the World Bank and asked them, how do we hollow out American industry? And they went to China and they went to the World Bank in the early 1980s. And it was a state-sanctioned effort, and it's detailed in Mike's new book on exactly how the World Bank officials showed the Chinese how to hollow out American manufacturing, which they did. The tune of 5.5 million jobs is the kind of minimum figure. I don't look at what China's been doing as anything less than hostile. They think eventually that their economy will surpass ours by leaps and bounds, and they won't beat us. But look at the numbers. $33 trillion of loans to Chinese businesses, of which they think they're going to have to write off about 10 trillion. We can manufacture toys, sneakers, shirts, gizmos of every kind in any other part of the world. There's nothing about a manufacturing site in China that's better than any other. Remember the dog food that had formaldehyde in it. Remember the agriculture products that had poison in them. Remember if you go to China and, you know, someone, whatever, asked his brother-in-law to paint these toys, and Mattel said, well, every toy had number 2, number 3 or 4. The paint, that's blue, that's yellow, that's green, and they went out and got the most horribly lead-based paint you could find on the market because it was cheap. No one wanted it. So it comes to this country, and little kids are, you know, kids will put anything in their mouth. So now we got little kids in America chewing on toys that get lead poisoning. I'm not enamored with this. I had a grandfather who taught at Dartmouth for 40 some odd years after fleeing Nazi Germany. And he wrote an article in 1958 He said that if we look at China as a market to sell cigarettes, and I think it was based on a Time magazine article at the time that said, boy, what a great market China's gonna be. We look at China that way, and they look at us similarly. We're not gonna have a good relationship between the two countries. Ain't gonna work. And I look at what China's done with Iran, North Korea, what it's doing in the South China Sea, what it's doing with Sudan, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, all the nice countries in the world. This is my area of expertise, and I have a love of Chinese art and culture and history. I studied at Yonsei University in Korea. That's what I studied in East Asia. Fell in love with that part of the world. But China is, according to Ash Carter, one of our major adversaries. I don't think it's a secret. And my view is, if I was an American company, I wouldn't have anything to do with China. Okay? I'd go to Colombia, South America. I'd go to Chile. I'd go to Brazil, even though they're having problems with Petrobras and so forth. I do business in Korea, Israel. I'm not enamored with, I think our companies have made terrible, terrible mistakes of being overstretched, if you want to use that word, with respect to China. And boy, I tell you, you look at some of the analysis in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, of what happens when Chinese have to write off $10 trillion of loans. I'm not sure how that, and it's true, China uses what, 70% of the cement? They get, they reduce their consumption of copper, and all of a sudden all the copper folks go nuts. The folks aren't buying these big boxes to put on ships, and then the ports, they're not buying leasing new ships and so forth. My job is, there's 7.65 billion people in the world. Let's let them grow, okay, with China. I mean, China got love, everybody should. But there's plenty of business to do, we should be doing with the rest of the world, rather than neglecting so much of the rest of the world that we kind of have written off and said, well, that's Bangladesh. Or, look at Russia. Russia's life expectancy, a white male, is less than it is now for a man in Bangladesh. In Russia, it's 58 years. You look at tuberculosis, AIDS, suicide, murder, cancers, smoking and alcoholism. It's really having an industrialized country in peacetime, having a death rate among adult white men go up is unprecedented. And yet that's happening in Russia. And China, look at the age structure, what they've done with their one-child family. You've got 37 million young Chinese men can't find a wife. Now, someone wagged the other day, said, well, go, they're all in Russia, because all the Russian men, nobody wants to marry anyway. But we have relied too heavily on China, okay? It was a great deal. Everybody got rich, billionaires every 5 minutes in China. But I tell you what, I think, as the former Treasury Secretary said, when the music stops, there are not going to be enough chairs for everybody to sit on. That's my worry about the U.S. economy. We tied ourselves much too tightly with China.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jeff.
One thing I do say to the Chinese, though, is when I talk to them, is that in the 70s, the Soviets had decided after Vietnam that and this was their line, the correlation of forces had shifted irrevocably with the socialist camps, right? And they were wrong, right? And so I warned the Chinese, don't make the same mistake the Soviets did. I mean, don't think that the correlation of forces has shifted in your favor, because all the indicators suggest maybe that's not true.
So do both you gentlemen think that if our country neglects this issue, that there's even a possibility or a chance for a second Cold War?
Yeah, I think there is. I think that President Xi is much more assertive than his predecessor. He's much more confrontational in some ways, and the best example of that is the South China Sea. So it's a complicated relationship. There are areas where we can make progress, but I think that overall it's more likely to be conflictual than cooperative.
Thank you, Jeff. Grace, go to the microphone, please.
This is a question for Mr. Husey. Back to the EMP effects would such an attack prevent, to what extent would it harm our military and nuclear capabilities? So let's say there is an EMP attack and we know through other forms of intelligence that it was definitely from North Korea. Could we respond by wiping out Pyongyang? And if so, why would North Korea ever launch such an attack?
If you wanted to shut America's military capability down in American society, you take us out of the business. We're not, or if tens of millions of Americans are dying and can't get food and water, we're not gonna be in the position of saying, hey, let's go fight somebody over there, even if somebody's taking over the Persian Gulf and the oil resources. Our military operates on ships and planes. They don't operate after an EMP, okay? Port of Charleston won't operate, okay? The West Coast might try to go from the West Coast and get something over to the Persian Gulf. Time is critical, and you're not gonna have the time to do that. Will our nuclear infrastructure work? Yes. The problem with rocket coming out of the ocean is, do you have nuclear forensics that tells you, no, you can't get any material, there's no debris. So then you go and find the ship at the bottom of the Atlantic. Oh, this is a Liberian chartered freighter, it's flying a Panamanian flag, and the crew are jihadis from Russia. Maybe if we can figure that out, they're all dead. Well, what are you, New Tehran? I don't think the American president does. If I'm in the business of trying to keep the United States out of world affairs, that's the attack I do. If I could do it with cyber, I do it with cyber. But Jim is exactly right on that, is that we can now, luckily can tell. We stopped hardening in 1993, in the Cold War. Senator Warner, the former Senator Warner,